So, hello Catechist. This video is going to be introducing you to all things about the third section of the Catechism. By the end of this video, you should know how to look up every ethical issue that might be questioned. And if the issue itself isn't listed, you will know an applicable principle to look it up. But let's begin, okay? It's all about relationship. Everything in theology, every catechetical thing that you're doing, it's all about relationship. The content, the process, it's all about relationship, okay? And that's really, really evident in this whole section. It comes down to relationship. Section 3 in the Catechism is called Life in Christ, and it is all about the actions of a human being and the morality of the actions and rights and wrongs. And so let's begin. This is an activity, I think I mentioned it earlier, but this is an activity I've done with middle school, high school, and adults and several different venues. And inevitably, even though some are sillier than others or whatever, they all come up with pretty much the same answers, which goes to my point that I'm going to be making. So the activity is you get these people in groups, and you say, imagine couples that have been married for 15 years. The honeymoon's over, and they've made it this far. And that's probably because they have some spoken or unspoken agreements that they've made. So list the kinds of agreements that you think couples tend to make, okay, by year 15 to help them, I don't know, you know what the boundaries and everything that they need to keep that reciprocal relationship going. List them. I give an example, like, for instance, even if you don't say it, you know not to spend a lot of money without talking to your spouse first, right? That's an example. So you put them into groups and you ask these questions, and I just can't do that now, obviously, with you. Okay, so we're just going to say that this is going back to the fact that you're not talking about God things here. You're talking about couples that are not Christian. Still have the same agreements, you're going to see. That's because the natural law that God has given us, that the human desires and values are part of how God made us, and that's for a reason, and that reason is relationship, right? Okay, these are some of the stuff that people tend to come up with. You might think of more, you think, oh yeah, that's true. I doubt any of you would disagree, and if you do, okay. But one of them is stay faithful, like don't cheat, okay? You have to agree which last name you're going to have. The names of your children, you'd want to both be okay with it. You might want to agree, you need to agree, your religion, you're going to each have your own. That's not even going to go to, but which church you're going to go to. You're going to have to agree on where you're going to go for vacation, those kinds of things. You probably should remember your anniversary and celebrate things and remember each other at certain times. Some people have date nights. You're going to have to make agreements on how to deal with in-laws, for better or for worse, and maybe initially where to spend your holidays and all that kind of stuff. You're going to know each other's political views, and you're going to either agree to disagree or whatever, but you're going to respect, either way, respect each other in the process. Kind of obvious, don't abuse me. You know, men customarily seek power through domination and women through manipulation. Even scriptures like, you know, men don't physically abuse, but women can nag, and maybe verbally or something. So don't abuse me, right? You have to appreciate, sometimes girls need girls' night out, guys need guys' night out, or whatever, it's different. Girl space, man cave, movie choices, so on and so forth. Uh, to communicate on all things important, especially agreement on where you're going to live, right? Money things, cars, what car you're going to get, what kind, when, all that stuff. Major job decisions, job movements, right? You're going to have some kind of agreement on chores around the house and who does what and why, when, and those kinds of things. Taking that communicate, period. It's an unspoken thing that you don't want your other person to lie to you. Who wants to say, lie to me today? And you appreciate honesty, even if it's not what you want to hear. So that idea of being honest with each other in communication, the secrets and stuff like that, you're going to have a kind of have to have agreements on areas of sexuality and pornography. Is that considered cheating? A lot of women think it is considered cheating. Or they're not exactly, even though they get it, they're not exactly pleased if, their husband, or even now their wife or whatever, whistles at the waiter or waitress going by, that kind of thing. And then it's probably, take care of and accept and be grateful for what you do have. And be reasonable about about the realities of the world and what you do have and what you can do. Right? These things. You can think of more. I don't want to make this video too long, and it's already going to be long, and I should start talking faster. But the point is you write these on the board, and then you lay them next to the commandments, and everything that married couples tend to agree on fit into that covenantal relationship that God wants with us. God has written on our human hearts the desires and needs and what's important in relationships. And the commandments, which belong to the natural law, is God's covenant with us. We talked about, it's been talked about before, how the image of marriage and covenant, the marital covenant in Scripture, is the most used for God's love for us. So, in all our actions, it's all about relationships. And so in the Catechism, okay, the ethics, the morality part is put in terms of the commandments. So the first three have to deal with relationship with God, and the last six have to do with our love of our neighbor. And these are all in order of priority. So, but you can see anything to do with relationship to God or religious freedom is in the first. Anything to do with your identity, even including your name and all these different things, God's name and what that means, is in the second. Time, all concepts of how you use your time well for God and for others, and the importance of leisure. It's in the third commandment, honor thy day. Honor thy father and mother. It's all about the relationships that you have with everybody and group. Yes, it talks about the parents and the children and the family relationship, but as we know with solidarity, those relationships are extended. It could be from employee to teacher. It could be international relationships, so we'll talk about that. You shall not kill. All the life issues, okay, are just anything to do with your physical, bodily life issues. Actually, scandal is in there too. It's in the fifth commandment. The sexuality, the gender, all those issues are, and your own sense of self is in the sixth commandment. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal covers anything to do with things, okay? Everything from economics to creation to business practices to all those things. Material things are in the seventh commandment. Eighth commandment, you shall not bear false witness. Anything to do with communication, okay, is going to be in there, whether it's obviously not lying or perjury, but also the media and art, the importance of art in all its forms and beauty. And commandments 9 and 10 are doing with the attitudes of your attachment to others and your attachment to things. They're very, very short. Um, but it is good to remember when we're doing all this that the numbering of the commandments differs in the Jewish tradition, in the Catholic tradition, and in the Protestant tradition. And the commandments are the same. It's just the numbering, so it's not a big deal, right? If you're using Protestant numbering, but for the sake of the Catechism uses the numbering that has been used since the time of Augustine, and that's 4th century. That picture there of Lewis just recommending, if you want easy to read spiritual reading that's not heavy, that's kind of like watching a movie, okay? Louis de Wohl is a great Catholic historical fiction writer. And for instance, The Restless Flame. I did intense studies on St. Augustine. And then after all that, I read The Restless Flame, and I could not believe how the anecdotal situations in this book were tied to real events. And so they're easy reading, they're good reading, anything by Louis de Wohl, that's just a little commercial. But the numbering of the commandments, we're using the ones from St. Augustine. Please know that it's a tradition with a little t, nothing to fight about with anyone, right, about the numbering. Okay, so right now I'm going to talk really, really quickly, okay, because I want you to be exposed to everything in Section 3 with maybe not having to have read it thoroughly, even though that would be best, but so you to have heard that, oh yeah, this topic's in that commandment, and I know which commandment to find it in. It's in Section 3, and it has to do with things, so it's in the 7th commandment, you shall not steal. See, you're going to be so smart after this. So turn on your listening quickly ears, and I'm just going to run through. You're going to see it's all underlined because I cut and pasted from the Vatican.va Catechism Online. Remember, the Catechism's online. And I'm just using the index to go through all the topics, okay? So I'm going to try to go through it quickly, and I'm sorry if any of it is painful, okay? So the beginning of the life in Christ doesn't start off with the commandments. It really starts off with the basics, reminding us we're made in the image of God, the human person is, and what that means, that we're called to relationship, okay? And that our vocation, which means calling, to beatitude means happiness, that we're all called to holiness, okay? So you see here, I'll break these down later, I'm sorry. So you see here the first section is about man's vocation, life, and the spirit. And I'm just going to break this down really quickly. Remember, the reason why human beings have dignity is simply because God created us. And he created us in his image. So even Hitler had human dignity. Okay, again, our vocation, we're all called to holiness. Why did God make you? Holiness, communion, it's all about relationship. It talks about freedom. Now, the concept of freedom is, it's thick, okay? And freedom is different than license. Freedom doesn't mean, well, I can do whatever I want. Actually, it talks about freedoms. The more we do what is good, the freer we become. How freedom is essentially linked to the truth, okay? And that's the difference between we're free or we're a slave to sin. Heady concepts. You can look into it more later. The morality of the action is talked about next. How do you judge what is right and wrong? And of course, we are judging actions. We're not judging consciences. But if you want to analyze an action, you use 3 things, and it's the OIC. And to help students remember it, you think, oh, I see. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. OIC, object, intention, and circumstances. So if you want to analyze any action, you need to look at the object of the act, the intention of the person, and the circumstances surrounding it, okay? The object of the act is the act itself, okay? The act itself, okay? The lying, or the drinking a glass of wine, I'll use that, okay? Let's say the drinking of the glass of wine is the object itself. What's the intention? The intention could be to just have a nice time with your friends and have a nice glass of wine with dinner or whatever. And that's fine. What are the circumstances involved? Is it illegal for you to drink that wine and therefore you're kind of disobedient, or you're underage or whatever, or anything? One of those things, object, attention, circumstances, all three have to be good and pure for the act itself to be good. It's important to know that good intentions do not make an object that is wrong right. So, for instance, you find this whole module very boring. So, I might as well kill you and put you out of your misery. I had the best of intentions, but it wasn't quite right, correct? So, when there are certain objects that are always wrong, okay, like murder, okay, perjury, blasphemy, adultery, those things, objects of the act, are always wrong regardless of intention. And one may not do evil that good may come of it, or the end does not justify the means. Moving on. We talked about this before. We're not going into it, but there's a section on how to deal with emotions, and that the emotions, how they're morally neutral. Remember, the passions is how the Catechism calls it, and sometimes people call them emotions, appetites, feelings, all the same thing. The next section is in the important formation of conscience, what conscience is, how ignorance plays into it. You know, vincible ignorance means conquerable ignorance, means you could have known. Invincible ignorance means you couldn't have known. Okay? So just like you're driving on a road and you're like, I'm sorry, officer, I didn't know it was, not an 80-mile-an-hour zone, whatever, you're going to get a ticket. One of the important phrases to see here is that our conscience is the primordial vicar of Christ. Our conscience even holds higher authority than the Pope, is what it's saying. It comes first, and the formation of conscience. We have built into us, and it's going to see in there, our synderesis, a built-in sense of right and wrong that we can cloud. Okay, how do you kill a frog? Slowly, like you don't put it in boiling water because you like, oh no, that's bad. Slowly. So we deaden our conscience gradually. The first time you rip off a Band-Aid, it hurts. The 10th time, it doesn't hurt as much. So we're responsible for forming habits in our conscience. And I'm talking too much, I got to go on. Chapter 2, the human community. A lot of the things with CST are found in this section. So anything to do with the human person, the common good, authority, social life, taking on social justice issues, and what some of those issues are can be found in the human communion. Remember, solidarity, everyone is our brother and sisters, and it's all about relationship. Chapter 3, the section of the moral law. Of course, the law is part of God's divine pedagogy, and we know following the understanding of the law from very Old Testament times. We have the natural law, then we have the Levitical law, and then we have Jesus's new law, and that is all discussed in this section. Also the role of grace and the primacy of grace and freedom, and then the role of church law and tradition with a capital D, tradition with a little t, what is the magisterium. That's kind of important as we move forward. And now we're going into the 10 Commandments. Remember, the 10 Commandments are in order of priority. So the first commandment we know is, I'm the Lord your God. You shall not have other gods before me. So what kinds of things does it talk about in this commandment? It talks about the faith, hope, and charity that is due God, and maybe the sins against faith, hope, and charity. For instance, you sin against hope by the two extremes. One is presumption in God's mercy, and one is despair in God's mercy. Talks about the differences and distinctions in adoration, prayer, sacrifices, promises, and vows. It talks about the importance of religious freedom and not forcing anyone in their conscience or forcing your religion, so to speak. Kids always love the sections on superstition, idolatry, divination, and magic. You know, if they ask about ghosts, you go to this section. It doesn't say there are no ghosts. It just says avoid an unhealthy curiosity in these things, because you are, in doing that, you're giving assent to power over time or knowledge. So all those things. It even mentions how Ouija boards are dangerous. You do not want to open that door. Unhealthy curiosity. Okay, it's kind of saying, okay, let's see what else. Who else can do God kind of things, and avoid it. It talks about, atheism means God doesn't exist. A means against, theism, God. And agnosticism means A, against, Gnostic means knowing, against knowing. So agnosticism is against, you don't believe that you can know who God is or have a relationship with him. Okay, those things are discussed in the first commandment. The second and third commandments, the second commandment, honor, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. One of the practices that I've had in teaching that I have found to be very successful, and I tell students that I am out to brainwash them, and it works, and they find it exciting too. I end the class, I say Jesus Christ, and they have to say, may he be praised. So the next time they're in the movie theater and they hear Jesus Christ used in vain, their brain says, may he be praised. And they know that that is a habit built into them, so they can make up, do some kind of reparation for the time that the Lord's name is taken improperly. Okay, obviously, we have people that don't realize what they're doing when they're saying this, and how to point that out. Anyway, can't get into that. Third commandment is keep holy the Sabbath. It talks about why Sunday, the resurrection, is the Sabbath for Christianity, and Jews still have Saturday. It talks about the obligation, there's a document on it called Dies Domini, of going to Mass on Sunday. It's not just about community, but it's also about the Eucharist. Okay, it talks about the Sunday obligation, though, too, and putting that in perspective of, people would risk their life and travel for days in order to get the opportunity to go to Mass. So it is incredibly important. But when you're the one responsible for a sick child and you need to keep feeding this child and there's no other option, you can't it weighs all those things out. It also talks about the importance in a person to not be a workaholic. It talks about the importance of leisure and proper leisure and making sure you have leisure, that is a respect for who you are supposed to be as a human being. So yay team on that one, right? So the next sections are love your neighbor, and they are in order of priority. And sometimes when you say, what's the most important of these? Some might say, don't kill. But actually, the most important is honor your father and mother. Comes before all these things. Why? Because it's all about relationship. And in the end, even when we die, the relationships, it's still about relationship even when our bodily life dies. So relationships. Honor your father and mother. It talks about all human relationships that exist. Yes, it talks about the importance of the family, the domestic church, the original soul of social life. It talks about the role of parents and admitting their mistakes too. It talks about the role of children and maybe even the role of children once they turn 18 and legal and all that kind of stuff. It talks about the role of the employer, the employee, teacher to student. It talks about government relationships. It talks about the importance of participating in society as a family, the layperson's importance of participating in that relationship, and patriotism as a virtue. You owe respect to that group, that country, in a sense, that has provided for you, at least in an environment where you are living. Patriotism is a virtue, and it talks about the international relationships, the importance of helping others. In this commandment, not to spend a long time on it, but armed resistance to oppression it's talked about at the end, and that means when should a country step into someone else's business? And it gives 5 conditions for that. Like, when is it good for America to step into Vietnam or Korea or Ukraine or Rwanda or anything, okay? It talks about all the things in North Korea, all these things. It talks about the conditions that one should consider before that in that relationship. We already talked about all that stuff, so I'm moving on. The 5th commandment, life. The 5th commandment, anything to do with life. And of course we know that life begins at conception. What that means is that human life, the DNA is present, okay, in the cells at that time. And it meets the definition of life in that it's growing and changing and all those things. So it is biologically defined as human life, the embryo, the zygote. And So all the issues to deal with life and death are found in this commandment. Your respect for life and death. And I'm just going to go through them really, really quickly, okay? Talks about the importance and the duty of self-defense and defending someone else. All right, sometimes for various reasons, people tolerate abuse. And that's not what Jesus is asking us to do, okay? We have a right and a duty to protect anything made in the image and likeness of God, which is ourself. Now, of course, you're going to get those questions, well, if an intruder comes in, can I shoot him? And then it gives, shoot not to kill and all this other stuff. All right, capital punishment, you know capital punishment, there's no good reason for it. Technically, way long ago, it was the right of the state in order to protect the common good, but when there's no other means, but the church is very strong. Today's day and time, there's no reason. Okay, so capital punishment, wrong. Homicide, intentional, non-intentional, it talks about, non-intentional by sin of omission, you're drunk driving. Still all the roles in that. Abortion, it says wrong, never good. Even cooperating in it, not good. Prenatal diagnosis. It's in there, okay, there's a section on it that says as long as it's not hurting the baby and you're not doing that with the intention of having an abortion, there's nothing wrong with it. Euthanasia, that's mercy killing and it happens a lot in Europe where someone else decides, okay, that they want to mercy. It's more merciful to end your life. Okay, I'm not going to go into the principles of double effect and all this other stuff. There's a little difference between the right to die when you make the decision to die. It's kind of like assisted suicide, and that's legal in different states, and we're not going into it. You can read it there, and there's other documents on it. It is important for you to know, though, personally, especially as you're dealing with own issues. Some people feel guilty when they deny themselves a life support or sign a DNR. They're like, isn't that like ending my life? And no, just remember the Catechism, and here it talks about those issues and further in documents. We do not need to accept disproportionate means or extraordinary means, like a ventilator, even dialysis, okay? In the DNR, some nurses are trying to change DNR, do not resuscitate, to have the terms AND, allow natural death, because then you can understand. It is not wrong to allow a natural death. Now, what is extraordinary means can vary per society, okay, and circumstance, and it could be economic, okay, but that is not required. But ordinary means are, and that's palliative care, and that is the medicine and anything needed to provide for your comfort, basic food and water, unless food and water makes things more difficult for you. Okay, suicide, objectively, suicide is wrong. But it points out we can never judge the person who has done this, okay? Just for your own information, and I found this in a pastoral counseling class, that it is helpful when you have a young person that has done this, don't necessarily glorify them, okay? Maybe, but address, because of the nature of young people, okay? What is good to, though, is embrace the anger. And whether it is through an improper use of drugs or however it happened, unite people in addressing the issue, and that will itself bring a healing process. Scandal is mentioned in here because it says in Scripture, he who leads another or encourages another into sin is better that a millstone be tied around his neck and thrown into the ocean. Okay, it talks about respect for your health. And in all things, it's moderation. You don't respect your health enough, or you respect it too much, like you're obsessed, okay? It talks about that. It talks about in scientific research, rules to go by, obviously protecting the person's consent and all things, that's in there. It talks about, it's under this thing as bodily integrity, but in there it talks about, no, torture is not good, even if you're getting good information from it, kidnapping and so on and so forth. Respect for the dead, it does talk about how to deal with the body of a dead person. Yes, cremation is okay if and only it is not done as a statement against the resurrection. And yes, the Catholic Church does have rights regarding the cremated remains. So that's to keep in mind. It talks about the importance of safeguarding peace and avoiding all war. It does in that section give conditions to consider within what they might be called a just war. We know there is no just war. It means when you can legitimately, as a country, defend yourself with arms. But it does talks about the arms production in a very negative light, and it gives a rationale there against the arms production, and it also talks about the economic disparity that is not good for life. Moving on quickly, you're going to have a lot of issues and things to deal with sexuality, and you know that you can look up other resources in theology of the body and so many other things that are out there. But it's always good to refer to the source itself and look at the wording carefully in the Catechism of the Catholic Church in the Sixth Commandment. In the very beginning of the Sixth Commandment, it talks about God made us in His image, and that is by being male and female. That is how, one of the ways, that's the way Scripture says we image God, because it necessitates relationship. And in it, the sexual identity of male and female, the Catechism talks about how that is both physical and affective, okay, spiritual and emotional. It also talks, so gender identity, one accepting one's biological identity is mentioned there in the Catechism. Chastity, it talks about chastity. Every person is called to this virtue, whether you're married, single. According to your state in life, you're supposed to practice this virtue of respect for yours and others' sexuality. And it talks about the importance of having a good friend and the importance of friendships to promote living well, living chastity well. Then it talks about the offenses against the virtue of chastity: lust, masturbation, fornication, prostitution, rape. The rationales are all in there. It does address homosexuality, and there's a lot of people get upset about the word in there. They do use the word disorder, and that's a hard one. People have a hard time hearing it because they're hearing it as if they're here. It's complicated, okay? But it's good to understand the word disorder when something is not ordered to the purpose for which it was created. So our eyes are ordered to the purpose of seeing, and when we can't see, there's some disorder in it that is preventing it, okay? Our reproductive organs were made for the purpose of reproduction, and we ourselves are made for the purpose of relationship and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, you know, and if you don't know, oh my goodness, but you know, a person with same-sex attraction goes straight to heaven. They just need to practice chastity like everyone else is called to practice chastity according to their state in life. All right, the love of husband and wife, this whole thing, conjugal love. Conjugal, it's not the word that rolls off the tongue or that any of us use in our daily language, but it's the one used in Catechism, so get used to it. Conjugal love means married love, and the conjugal act means sex. So both married love and sex have a twofold purpose, like not either or, but twofold, like one purpose that has two dimensions. And that is, we call it unitive and procreative. We call it the good of the spouses and the transmission of life. Young people say babies and bonding. Okay, so anything that violates fruitfulness or the unitive dimension is usually when, in sexual ethics, there's a problem. So if fruitfulness offenses, contraception, one of the and it does recommend periodic continence, which, what do they call that? Anyway, it does recommend that. It also mentions that a child is a gift, not a right, and it says those who can't have children, it's a cross. It also says homosexuality is a cross. The 2 times in the Catechism it says that. Offenses against the unitive dimension, anything that creates a child, which is good, outside of sex, the marital bond, the marital love, okay, doesn't have that unitive bond. IVF, in vitro fertilization, is included in that. And that's hard because so many of, maybe even you watching this, were created in that way. And you still are created in the image and likeness of God. So that's important, and that's a hard one to teach, especially when you have someone in the room. And it's hard because it's not only an offense against chastity, but in the process of IVF, you will learn that it's hundreds of embryos are created. And that's when you get into the issue that life, embryos, a lot of them are destroyed in the process. And, you can either freeze them, use them for research, which is not good according to, or throw them down the sink. There's so many, anyway. So, marriage offenses also includes adultery, and it mentions divorce. Again, we need to make the distinctions, and people don't always understand it. There is a difference between a civil marriage and a sacramental marriage. Okay, one can be married civilly, but not sacramentally. In divorce is the same way. Sometimes you can be married and get civilly divorced, and you need to protect yourself, to protect your children, either physically or economically, and that separation. The remarriage part is something that you discuss, and that's a different thing. All right, it also talks about polygamy, incest, and living together for union, and it gives the rationale why that is not, how that's an offensive marriage. All right, moving on, the seventh commandment. The seventh commandment talks about all things, and money and things, private property, government. So it talks about contracts, it talks about gambling. In and of itself, gambling's not wrong. In and of itself, like drinking a glass of wine, in and of itself, it's all those other things that might go around it, okay? Talks about the treatment of animals. Again, all in moderation. You don't abuse animals and you don't worship them. It talks about business or government enterprises, and the reason for its existence should always be the human person. Anything that's selfish or has unrestrained capitalism or totalitarian enterprises, not in keeping. It addresses political systems directly, okay? It talks about Catholic social teaching and the principle of subsidiarity and the importance of that in political systems. Subsidiarity is when it's one of the risks against socialism. When socialism comes in, the risk is that the government will be too micromanaging, whereas the risk of capitalism would be the preferential option for the poor and things like that. So they all carry risks. Talks about work, wages, the role of the state, employment, the importance of, yes, you can join a union. Yes, you can have a strike as long as it's a legit, within parameters. Talks about the importance of government helping, as it should. Talks about how responsibility in all these decisions in the government belong to the layperson and not the pastor. The pastor should probably can give advice on principles, but lay people need to affect politics and economics in society. And again, it talks about the preferential option for the poor. Going into the eighth commandment is all about truth and communication. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The witness of the martyrs throughout the century and the witness of our lives is a witness to truth, okay? Talks about how perjury, never acceptable. Now, these things, you kind of cringe, okay? But it talks about these things. Us ruining someone else's reputation is it's bad, okay? So it talks about rash judgment. We should give the benefit of the doubt and be prudential at the same time. That's such a hard thing because our instinct wouldn't. Anyway, talks about detraction and calumny. Both of those are forms of gossip. Detraction is when you tell someone something about someone that's true, or calumny is when you tell something about someone that's false. Both are wrong, okay, because you're ruining someone's reputation with someone who does not have a right to know that information. Talks about how flattery, adulation, boasting, or disparaging, irony, and sarcasm is a distortion of the truth. Talks about lying and the importance of, if you lie, to make reparation for that by making sure the truth is known. It talks about how all is governed by charity, and really communicating the truth is only to those who have a right to know. It says the importance of professional personnel, like doctors and stuff, to keep their promise of privacy. And it talks about the role of the confessional, okay, and the priest, and the sacredness of maintaining those secrets. Those secrets are important. It talks about the role of the media, the social media, those watching, those creating, all of that. And then it talks about the importance of the arts in communicating truth, beauty, and goodness. And if you are an artist out there, I Google John Paul's letter to artists. It's a quick, beautiful read, and you will be encouraged in that. Okay, in the 9th and 10th commandment, yay, we're almost done. It talks about the attitudes that drive us, okay? The concupiscent desires that we have, the desires of the flesh, because we're composite body and soul, we have those. Some of those desires, it comes naturally. It's where we have to practice self-mastery, and that concept is talked about in there. And we long and we work towards building the habits of purity of heart. It talks about the role of modesty and even the moral permissiveness of governments and those in authority in these areas, and not helping people, not the moral permissiveness of an authority of allowing certain things to happen that's not in their best interest. And in the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, it talks about coveting, envy, and avarice. You really want that dress that someone else has, or those shoes, or that iPhone, or whatever. That's a natural thing. Envy comes in, the definition is sadness over another's good. Okay? You're sad that they have it. There's a difference, so just kind of know that. It talks about the importance of poverty of spirit. Poverty of spirit means that our attitudes are not attached to things, and we can be attached to a lot of things. We can be attached to things, cars, phones. We can be attached to time. We can be attached to our way. We're constantly breaking our attachments. Yes, and then it ends the whole section. We do all this so that God may be all in all. And that is section 3 in summary. And now you know how to find most anything that has to do with human actions.